I never believed in fate. When you live on the streets, you learn quickly that hope is a dangerous thing. It's a weight you can't afford to carry. But that night, outside a fancy downtown restaurant glowing with warm lights and laughter from people who didn't have to check the temperature before deciding where to sleep, fate stopped right in front of me, and it was wearing Heartbreak. I was standing near the entrance, pretending not to feel invisible, when I saw him through the glass. He looked nervous, hopeful. The kind of hopeful people like me stopped being a long time ago. He sat across from a beautiful woman, candles flickering between them. I watched quietly, a ghost in the cold, as he stood up, his hands shaking, and pulled out a small velvet box, a proposal. My heart tightened for him even before she spoke. You learn to read faces out here. You have to. Her reaction wasn't joy, it was shock, then this slow, cold embarrassment. She laughed, an awkward, sharp sound that cut through the glass. She pushed the box away, and her words, I could see them forming on her lips. They still sting my ears. I was just killing time. This is too much. Then she did something I'll never forget. She picked up the ring, not even looking at it, and threw it on the polished floor like it was trash, like he was trash. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. His eyes just filled. He stood there, humiliated in front of the entire quieted section of the restaurant, and then he turned. He walked out, right past me, broken. He didn't even see me. That's when I saw it. The ring, a little circle of caught light, was lying near my worn-out shoes. I picked it up. It was warm from her hand, and I ran. He was a block away, his shoulders slumped, walking with no destination. "Hey!" I called out, my voice rough from disuse. "Hey! You dropped this!" He turned, confused. Then he saw the ring in my outstretched palm. His face changed, not because of the ring, but because he knew. He knew I had seen everything, the whole ugly, private collapse of his dream. I didn't lie. "She doesn't deserve you," I said, the words coming out firmer than I meant. "A man with a heart brave enough to love like that. That's rare." She threw away something real. He looked at me, really looked at me, saw the frayed jacket, the too-thin clothes, the life in my eyes. He smiled, but it was the saddest smile I'd ever seen. "You can keep the ring," he said, his voice hollow. I shook my head, my hands still steady between us. "Some things shouldn't be kept by people who didn't lose them." He was quiet for a long moment, the city noise filling the space between us. Then he nodded toward an all-night diner across the street, its neon sign buzzing. Then, "Will you sit with me? Just coffee. Nothing more." That coffee turned into 2 hours. Then it turned into meeting at the same bench by the city library every Thursday. Our conversations were slow, careful, like we were both testing ice over deep water. He learned how I aged out of foster care at 18 with a garbage bag of clothes and a smile that didn't work anymore. I learned his name was James, that he'd worked 80-hour weeks for years, believing love was something you had to earn, something you paid for with sacrifice. He never once looked at me with pity, and I never looked at him like he needed saving. We were just two broken pieces, sitting on a bench, not trying to fix each other, just acknowledging the breaks. One night, a guy tried to grab my bag. My whole life was in that bag. James stepped in front of me without a second of hesitation. He didn't fight. He just stood there, solid, until the guy backed off. James was shaking after, but he smiled. "Nobody takes your stuff," he said, simple as that. Another time, I got sick. Really sick. Fever, chills, the kind where you just have to disappear and wait it out. I was gone for 2 weeks. When I finally dragged myself back to our bench, he was there. He saw me, and his whole face just crumpled with relief. He'd been coming every day, he said, searching. He helped me apply for a shelter program, filled out the forms with his nice pen, but he never treated me like a project. It was just a thing you do for someone you care about. People stared. Of course they did. A well-dressed man and a homeless girl, sharing coffee, laughing sometimes. The whispers were like static. But the space on that bench between us, it started to feel like the only real place in the whole city. Love didn't arrive suddenly. It wasn't a lightning strike. It grew quiet. In the shared silence when the coffee was gone. In the way he'd always get a second napkin for me. In the way I started to remember the little things he said, holding on to them for the cold nights. The ring stayed in my pocket. I carried it, a strange secret. He never asked for it back. It sat there, a cold little circle, and slowly, its meaning began to change. It wasn't about her rejection anymore. It was a reminder of the night everything turned, the night he walked away from one love story, and without knowing it, stepped right into the beginning of another. And then came the day I realized the truth, a truth so terrifying and beautiful it stole my breath. I was in love with him, and I had absolutely no idea what to do about it. The realization was a quiet earthquake. It didn't shake the ground. It shook me. I was in love with James, and it was the most impossible thing I'd ever felt. Love, for someone like me, wasn't a shelter. It was a liability, a point of vulnerability where the world could get in and gut you. I carried the feeling like a live wire in my chest, terrified he'd somehow touch it and know. Things shifted. The easy silence between us now had a current running under it, my current. I'd catch myself watching the way his hands wrapped around his coffee cup, or the small line that appeared between his eyebrows when he listened. I memorized it all. I started pulling back, just a little, making excuses to leave the bench early, missing a Thursday. I thought I was protecting us both. He noticed. Of course he did. He found me one evening, not at our bench, but huddled in the doorway of a closed bookstore a few blocks away. The sky was the color of bruised plum, and a cold drizzle had started. He didn't have an umbrella. His hair was damp. "You're avoiding me," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a fact, spoken softly, and it hurt more than if he'd shouted. "I'm not," I lied, pulling my knees tighter to my chest. He just stood there in the rain for a moment, then sat down on the wet pavement beside me. Not too close, but close enough. Did I do something? The concern in his voice was my undoing. "No," I whispered, my throat tight. "You didn't do anything. That's the problem. You're just you, and I'm just me. And this bench, this coffee, it's a bubble, James, and bubbles pop." He was quiet for so long I thought he might just get up and leave. Finally he spoke, his eyes fixed on the rain-slick street. "You think I don't know who you are? I see you, Maya. I see how you look out for the older guy who sleeps by the library. I see the way you save half your sandwich for that stray dog. I see the strength it takes for you to just get through a day." He turned his head to look at me, his eyes glistening. "You think I care about the bubble? The world is outside the bubble. The bubble is the only place that's made sense to me in a long, long time." My vision blurred. I looked down, fumbling in my pocket. My fingers closed around the cold metal. I pulled out the ring. It sat in my dirty palm, catching the dim light from the street lamp. "You should take this back," I said, my voice cracking. "It's yours. It shouldn't be with me." He didn't look at the ring. He looked at my face. "Why did you keep it all this time?" I couldn't speak. I just shook my head, the tears escaping, hot and shameful. "Tell me," he whispered, and it was a plea. So I did. I told him the truth, the words tumbling out raw and unplanned. Because it was the beginning. It was the night you walked into my life, and every time I felt it in my pocket, it reminded me that sometimes the best things don't come when everything's perfect. They come after the break. They come when you're walking away and someone stops you. The rain fell softly between us. The city sounds faded to a distant hum. Then slowly, he reached out. But he didn't take the ring. He closed my fingers around it, his warm hand enveloping my cold one. He held my fist between both of his. "Then keep it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Not because of how the story started, but because of how it's going. He leaned in, resting his forehead against mine. We stayed like that, in that wet doorway, two shadows holding on to a single point of warmth. The ring was pressed between our hearts. "I'm scared," I breathed, the confession leaving me defenseless. "Me too," he admitted, a soft laugh mixing with a sigh. "But I'm more scared of you disappearing." That was the turning point, the line we crossed without moving an inch. He didn't sweep me off my feet. He didn't buy me a new life. He just made space for me in his. I got into the shelter program. He'd meet me after my shifts at the part-time job I found. We'd walk, we'd talk, we'd sit on our bench. It was slow. It was real. Months later, on a warm spring evening, we were back at that same bench. The ring was on a simple chain around my neck, tucked under my shirt. It wasn't a promise of forever. It was a reminder of our beginning. He turned to me, the setting sun painting everything in gold. He took my hand, his thumb tracing over my knuckles. "You know," he said, his tone light but his eyes serious, "I never got to finish what I started that night at the restaurant." My heart stuttered. "What do you mean?" He smiled, a real full smile that reached his eyes and lit something deep inside me. He got down off the bench, not on one knee. That belonged to a different story, a different ghost. He just knelt on the pavement in front of me, right there on the crowded sidewalk, and held both my hands. "Maya," he said, his voice clear and sure, "I'm not asking you to marry me. Not today. I'm asking you to let me love you, for as long as you'll let me. I'm asking you to build a life with me, from the ground up. No fancy restaurants, just us, the real us." He wasn't offering me a ring. He was offering me his heart, his future, his mornings and his nights. He was offering a partnership, not a rescue. I looked at him, this good, kind, brave man who saw me when I was invisible, and I felt the last of my walls crumble into dust. I slid off the bench and knelt with him, right there on the concrete. "Yes," I said, and it was the easiest, most certain word I'd ever spoken. I didn't just say it. I meant it with every scar, every memory, every hope I never thought I'd have. He pulled me into his arms, and people walked around us, and the city kept moving. But we were still. In the middle of everything, we were finally, completely still. The ring he let go of that night. It found its way back, not to a finger in a restaurant, but to a heart that finally learned how to beat for two. And this time, he didn't let go, and neither did I.